Good morning, everybody. I'm out here running my dog this morning on a beautiful spring morning. Amazing little breeze coming off the hills here. The light behind me has been amazing with the sun hitting the clouds and just reflecting all sorts of different colors off of the sky and feeling a little bit of warmth too. And today I just wanted to take a minute and share some things with you that I don't often share with a lot of other people. Sometimes people will ask me why I got into the work that I got into and my story as to what I do and why I do what I do. And the short version I usually give is that early on I had some things happen in my life that led to me seeing and believing the power of being able to help other people through counseling. I felt a little bit guided to go into the counseling field and to specifically work with families and marriages. And through the course of my schoolwork, that's what I ended up doing. I ended up working for the drug courts of southeastern Idaho. That then led to me specializing in addiction. That then led to specializing in sexual addiction. And then that's kind of here we are. And that's the short version. But today, I wanted to take a minute and share with you a little bit of the longer version that has a little bit more of the personal details in it. So I'm hoping that in sharing these things, that you'll find some value in it, that it will be helpful to somebody. I find a lot of value in it for my own self. It's basically the whole reason why I do what I do and why I feel called to the work that I do with men and women who are healing from betrayal, trauma, and sexual addiction. So my story starts around the age of 13. 13 was the beginning of my relationship with pornography. I was at the park, and we had a park right next to the high school where we lived, and I was 13 years old. My brothers were with me. They were probably 12 and 10, and I had another friend with me, and we were running around the park, and we were looking for places to build forts. And of course, somehow, I don't know how this always happens, but somehow we stumbled into some pornographic magazines that had been thrown into a hollowed out tree. And I'm guessing they were put there by some of the high school kids because the high school was right next to the park. And so me and my brothers and and one of my friends, we found these magazines and we all kind of saw the images in them. And at that time, as a 13-year-old boy, I'd never really seen anything like it before. And there were two things that started to happen for me. The first was that there was something that sort of lit me up. I got excited. I felt the energy turn on inside of me. I felt really, really curious. I wanted to know more. I wanted to understand what I was seeing. And so that part of me started to turn on, and that curiosity started to happen inside of me. At the same time, I started to feel this weird, sick feeling inside. I felt wrong. I felt bad. I felt like there was something off. And I could tell that the people I were with felt the same way. And so we closed the magazines. We shoved them in the tree and we ran home. And I didn't tell anybody, but a couple of weeks later, when I was by myself, I ended up back at the park by myself, looking at those same images, trying to figure out what I was feeling, why things felt so good on one hand and why things felt so bad on the other hand. And that was the beginning. As a 13-year-old kid, in my time, we didn't have much access. The internet wasn't really working very well yet. It was just starting to come into play, and so I just kind of stumbled into things here and there for the next couple of years. Maybe at a friend's house on the HBO channel, maybe stumbling into another image here or there, or another magazine out in a field or something. And then around the time high school started, that's when I started to be able to get more access to things when I learned about the internet and how the internet was working, even though it was dial-up at the time and everything would load really, really slow. In the meantime, I was growing and I was learning, and I was growing up in a pretty staunch religious home that was teaching things about the law of chastity, which was that we should respect our bodies, that we should save our sexual selves for our partners when we're married, which I fully believed in. But because there were things happening in my life, I felt like there was something wrong with me. I felt like I was bad because there was a piece of me that was turned on to these sexual experiences that I'd stumbled into and that I was craving more. And I felt that because I was having the craving, there was something wrong with me. I couldn't tell anybody, and thus begun the beginning relationship with a secret addiction to pornography. And it wasn't really severe. I was fighting it all the time, trying not to do it. At the beginning, it would only happen once every few months or so. And then as I grew in high school, there were a couple of things that happened in my high school that sort of amplified the way that I used pornography. And the biggest thing that happened in high school is that I had a traumatic experience happen when I was a sophomore in high school. And I was on the basketball team, played up 1 year, so I was on the JV team, and then I sat the bench on the varsity games. And so it was game night. We just finished our JV game. We were sitting on the bench of the varsity game, and I was sitting there with my 5 best friends, and we were trying to decide what we're going to do after the game for the night. And we were talking about, who we're going to go hang out with or where we're going to end up. And one of the guys suggested that we go up on the couch that we'd put up on the school roof. And we go up to the couch some nights, we'd climb the roof, sit up there, talk, hang out, look at the stars, do what teenagers do in high school. And that was the suggestion. And when that suggestion was made, I felt like I didn't really want to do it. I felt sick inside. I felt like it wasn't the right thing to do for the night. But I was the youngest one, and I didn't want to be left out, and I didn't want to be ridiculed, so I didn't say anything. And so after the game, we climbed up on the roof, and we just hung out there most of the night. And on the way back down, there were 3 of my friends who had gotten off the roof, and I was still on the roof, and then I had my 5th friend behind me. And on the way back down, it had gotten frosty and icy, and my friend behind me slipped, and he fell. And as he hit the ground, I could tell that there was going to be some real problems. And it was pure panic. Some of my other friends ran away because they didn't know what to do. One of them went and called the paramedics. I jumped off of the roof and went and tried to do first aid on him until the paramedics got there. And they got there. They could tell something was severely wrong. They told me to run up to his parents' place and tell him which hospital they were taking him to. And so I ran up to his parents' place, and then I ran home. And I happened to be coming home to my dad's 40th birthday party. My mom had thrown my dad a 40th birthday surprise party, and all of their friends were there. I didn't want to go cause a scene, so I snuck into the basement, just totally confused, totally scared, feeling totally responsible for this accident that had happened. And as I went down into my bedroom, the only thing I could think to do was pray. And I said the most fervent prayer that I've ever said in my life, that my friend would be okay and that things would turn out fine. And it was one of the few times where I felt completely filled with love. I felt totally consumed and felt a peace, and a message came inside of me that said, everything's going to be just fine. It's all okay. And when I finished that prayer, I lay down in bed and I slept like a baby. I woke up in the morning, and when I woke up, the phone rang, and it was my friend's parents calling to say that my friend had passed away. And for a teenage kid who had just had these weird experiences where I had felt partially responsible for the accident in the first place, I'd had what I thought was a spiritual experience that said everything's going to be okay, and then to get a phone call that says your friend is dead, it totally messed me up emotionally. I felt responsible. I went into deep depression. I started to struggle with my self-worth and my value. Even though I was the popular kid at school, I was the captain of 3 sports teams. I was, my nickname was the prophet because people thought I was highly religious. I was on the seminary council at our school for church. I was involved in all things good, and on the outside I looked like I had it all together, but on the inside I was carrying this burden of shame, this feeling of responsibility. And the way that I tried to cope is that I continued to turn to pornography in secret. And so I'd go and put on my face in the daytime, and then at nighttime I'd go and I'd cope with pornography, all the while feeding myself messages that I wasn't enough, that I would never measure up. And that continued to grow and settle in until at the point in high school I was so depressed that I found myself having made plans to end my own life, feeling guilty for the things that I was doing at nighttime, feeling like I was betraying my God, feeling like I was hiding from the people that I loved the most, feeling like I wasn't worth anything. And I found myself one night in the springtime with my hands clutching the guardrail of an overpass at around 2 a.m, waiting for a semi-truck to come by so that I could jump off of the overpass and end my life. And I actually believe that God saved my life that night, because at about the time that I was waiting for this truck to come by, there wasn't any traffic at 2 a.m, thank goodness, and behind me somebody pulled up and rolled down their window and solicited me to have sex with them, of all things. And something about that just kind of snapped me out of the dark place that I was in for a moment. I looked at what I was doing. I looked at them. I turned them down and said, no, thank you. And said I was just going for a walk. And I walked myself home and I tucked myself into bed. And the next morning, I ended up having a massive fight with my brother that was out of my character. And my mom said, something is wrong with you, Tyler. We've got to get you some help. And so that thus began the beginning part of getting help, where for my mental health and my depression, I got some counseling. I was on medication for a while for my depression, and it really, really helped. The only thing that wasn't discussed was my pornography use. And the mental health cleared up a little bit. I still felt the shame of the pornography use. I was starting to let go of the feeling of responsibility towards what had happened with my friend. I started to kind of come out of the darkness and see some light, and I decided to go and serve a mission for my church, where I spent 2 years in Baltimore, Maryland, proselytizing for my church. And it was a great time of my life. I felt the clouds lift. I felt my depression come off. I still struggled a little bit with the addictive things that I was battling that I'd kept secret. I was dishonest a little bit about getting out there because I never actually cleared up everything with my ecclesiastical leaders to go out there. But I served a great mission. I had amazing experiences. I grew closer to God. I came home more confident. And I came directly off of my ecclesiastical church mission and went straight up to school. And I went to school at BYU, Idaho. And when I went back to school, that's when I met my wife. And I met her right towards the end of the school year. We dated through the summertime. She was just an amazing person. She was just had the most beautiful smile, and she was so resilient. And I followed her all the way through the summer. So she left to go. She was originally going to be in Utah where I could see her, and then she decided to go to southern Utah where I'd have to drive to see her, and then she ended up being in New Mexico where I had to really drive to see her. And so we alternated weekends until we started really fully dating, and that's when we got married. My wife married me assuming that I was everything that I said I was. In the meantime, I still had this little habit going on in the darkness of viewing pornography. And I would battle it. I'd tell myself I didn't have a big problem, but I did. I had a problem, and I was continuing to hide it because I felt so ashamed over it, and I felt that if anybody actually really knew me and actually really knew what was going on, that I wouldn't be worthy of love and affection. And I knew that I was a good person on the other side because I was doing all of these great things, but I had this weird twist inside where on one hand I was a good person, on the other hand I felt like I wasn't a good person. And then people would come to me and say, Tyler, you're amazing, like you're a hard worker, or you're a spiritual guy, or you really get along with people. And I could never actually accept their compliment because deep inside it was always, if you really knew who I was. So I continued to date my wife. We got married, and a couple of years into our marriage is when it all blew open. And my wife had been doing some night school, and I had this habit of every time she'd go to do her night school, I'd get on the computer and I would do my routine where I'd check my email, check Facebook, go watch a few YouTube videos, and sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it would end up with pornography use. Well, on one particular night, my wife came home from work. It was a night that I had actually been acting out, and she came into the door. She didn't say a word. She went directly to our office and turned on the computer and saw the history of what I'd been viewing. And that was the first time in my life that somebody actually knew some of the things that I'd been doing for years. And it was devastating to her. She felt lied to. She felt devalued. She felt confused. She felt angry. And in that moment, I was afraid that I was going to lose everything. And I did, because a couple of days later, she decided to leave me. And she happened to leave at the same time I was leaving to go to work, and I was driving at that time from Rexburg to Pocatello, which is about an hour-long drive, and she was leaving to go to New Mexico, which was the same pathway. And so we were side by side on the highway. She had packed up the things that she needed along with my 2 little girls. And we were driving side by side on the highway, and all I could see through the window as she would pass me or as I would pass her is I could see this devastated look in her eyes. I could see the tears falling, and I could just see 2 little sets of pigtails in the back seat. Couldn't even see my daughter's faces. And as I rolled up to the exit to go off to go to work, she pulled up next to me and she looked over at me for a split second with these eyes that I'll never forget. And they weren't eyes of hatred or anger, they were eyes of sadness and devastation, and yet there was still a look of love in those eyes. And as I exited, there was something inside of me that shattered. It broke. And the thought came to my mind that said, Tyler, you can never afford to hurt people the way that you have hurt these people. You have to do whatever it takes to get yourself right and to become the kind of man that they deserve to have in their lives. I went to work. I came home. I was so emotionally spent I couldn't even get to my bedroom. I collapsed on the front floor of my living room, and I cried out to God saying, I don't know what to do. I know I'm not even worthy to be in your sight, but I don't know what to do. I'm going to lose everything, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And again, I was filled with that same peace and that same love that came the night of my father's 40th birthday years and years ago. I was consumed with the feeling of love and a feeling and a thought that said, you're my son, and I love you. In the moment then when I most needed love and deserved it the least, is when I had the experience of realizing that I was redeemable, that I was somebody who could become the kind of man that I'd always wanted to be and to live with integrity. And thus began my journey. I started doing everything I could for recovery. I started reading books. Luckily, I had a job working for the drug courts of southeastern Idaho where I was teaching people the skills of addiction recovery, and so I started to apply all of those same skills to myself. I started to grow in confidence. I started to realize that part of my story was actually potentially gold, that it was going to help other people, and that maybe I'd traveled the road that I'd been on and had the experiences that I'd been on for a reason, because I could connect with people who had mental health problems, and I could connect with people who had shame problems. And I realized that I was sitting on something that could potentially help other people who had been in the similar situations to me and who had felt hopeless and lost and in despair. And so since then, that was about 15 years ago when that all broke loose with my wife. Since then, I've spent my life mastering the art of becoming the best man I can be. And that includes the principles of recovery. I've learned through trial and error and through struggle that living with pure honesty and integrity leads to being able to sleep at night with a clear conscience, which is the best feeling in the world. I've learned that I can be imperfect and still be a good man. I've learned that I'm a work in progress, and I get to be a work in progress for the rest of my life, and that's a beautiful thing. I've come to believe that God gives us all our challenges because those challenges are the fertilizer that lead to beauty and growth and that lead to us being able to have an impact in the lives of other people. Everything that I teach here in my practice has been applied in my own life. And the principles that I teach here I've found to be true, and they lead to joy and vibrance and beauty. So when people ask me why I do what I do what I do because I've been through hell. And I've found love and peace and joy on the other side. And one of my favorite things in the world is to see somebody else go through their own personal hell and to come out on the other side with confidence and a deeper understanding of who they are and who God intended them to be in the lives of other people. So thank you for listening. I hope this is beneficial for somebody. And I'm grateful to be a part of such an awesome work. Thanks.